Madawaska was a disputed territory between the United States of America and Canada in the early 1800s. The dispute lasted 59 years, wherein both sides did the best they could to show dominance over the region, and a war nearly started because of this dispute. You may ask, how did this dispute start? How did it end? What will happen during it? And most importantly, what does John Baker have to do with it? That's what I'll be talking about today, and more. The independence of the United States of America was recognized by Great Britain in 1783 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. Along with recognizing America's independence, borders were set up. Not all these borders were very well defined, though. The northern border between the District of Maine and British America was defined as such, and later in the same paragraph being defined as. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure what these mean exactly, and it's partly why the dispute started. These definitions are vague and don't make a lot of sense. The mentioned highlands were not defined. There could have been these groups of mountains or these group of mountains, which the USA and British claimed respectively. After the U.S. Revolutionary War ended, the current and former British colonies had tense relations. British loyalists from the new U.S. began moving to Lower Canada and Nova Scotia, later New Brunswick. With them, it seems they brought more tension and dislike for the new United States, who they had just fought a several-year-long war with, and who you could argue were kind of terrorists. These feelings weren't one-sided, though. There were people in America who thought they should continue the revolution and take the rest of British America, or in the least didn't like their former rulers having a large stronghold to their north in Canada and didn't want to see them be more powerful. Border disputes, such as the Madawaska Dispute, did not help any of this. Even though there were some attempts to solve this specific one, none of them worked. Both sides really wanted to have the area. It was rich in lumber, had animals that could be hunted for furs. For the British, at least, had the St. John River, which was a nice route to send mail from Quebec to Fredericton. And, as always, they wanted to grow empire. In big part because of those growing tensions and the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, the USA and Canada would go to war in 1812. For most of the war, there was little fighting in the area we're interested in, Maine and New Brunswick. Most of it happened around the northern US and southern Canada. But in 1814, the British decided to invade Maine. When Maine was invaded, the Mainers asked the government of Massachusetts for help, a state which Maine was a part of at the time, but the government refused to send any kind of aid, which upset the citizens of Maine a lot and helped them want to be their own state in the future. The War of 1812 ended in 1815, the British left Maine for the most part, and the status quo was brought back with the Treaty of Ghent, signed in 1814 and ratified in 1815. Since no one really won the war, that Madawaska stayed disputed, and tensions only grew. Especially after in 1820, when Maine became its own state and claimed the disputed land, and Americans started to move into the area, such as the legendary John Baker. To explain John Baker in 2 words, you could say land speculator, or possibly American patriot. Baker lived on several plots of land in the Madawaska region of the St. John River Valley, which he inherited from his dead brother. He worked lumber and farmed, and was married to Sophia Rice, who he also inherited from his dead brother as a widow. But why is John Baker important, and possibly an American patriot? Well, in 1827, John Baker held a 4th of July party in Mariamdicook on the St. John River. He invited everyone from the area to go to the party, including Americans, English, and French settlers. Mostly Americans from Kennebec arrived, though, and there were very few French people. During the party, Baker had a flagpole put up, whereupon he raised a flag that his wife had sewed. He then told his partygoers they were on American territory and should look upon themselves as subjects of the United States. They set a date, August 10th, to form a compact government, in which Baker would be the general of. This is the creation of the entity we now call the Republic of Madawaska, or the Madawaska Republic. After Baker's stunt and the declaration of his republic, he would get into more hijinks. Once he threatened a British mail carrier with a sword for not handing the mail over to him. He engineered a meeting with a sheriff, who he then threatened with a sword again, and his buddies who had muskets and clubs. Generally, it seemed he sowed disorder in the small river valley for the next few weeks. Baker's little reign of terror did not last, though, because he was arrested by a sheriff and 12 to 14 deputies on September 25th. I would assume there were that many because they feared the crazy man. Baker's arrest and 13 months spent in a British prison helped the British cause in the area. It possibly showed to the people of Madawaska that the British could assert their authority, even if others claimed the U.S. had authority there, like John Baker. It also showed to London and Washington that they probably needed to do something about this dispute. British arresting Americans and Americans proclaiming over the land the British had rough control over was not a good thing for either of them. It easily would lead to higher tensions and possibly a conflict in the future if either nation said the rights of their people were heavily violated. And neither wanted a reoccurrence of what happened in 1812. So in 1828, the British and Americans decided to settle the border. They couldn't decide amongst themselves though. So they looked around Europe to find a king to do it for them. They eventually found King William of the Netherlands and decided he should do it, since he would supposedly be a neutral arbitrator. Both sides felt he would be neutral and gave him their entire statements. In 1831, after a long wait, the King of the Netherlands decided what to do. He would give neither the Americans nor the British the entire piece of the land, as it seems he was expected to do, but he would divide it between them. The UK was fine with William's decision, but the US was not. Specifically, the young state of Maine was not happy. At some point, either right before or right after William's proposal, Maine made Madawaska a township, and probably partly because of this, the US refused to accept William's proposal. So, the dispute stayed, and tensions only rose higher. Over the next few years, several Americans and French people were arrested in Madawaska by British authorities. These arrests amped up between 1837 and 38 though, when Americans started crossing the Canadian border to help rebels fight against the British government there. The British already feared a US invasion because of a dispute, US generals inspecting fortifications near the disputed area, and Americans who lived in the area, stirring things up. But now that Americans are starting to help rebels, that really worry the government, so it seems. So, in 1838, there were a multitude of arrests of Americans in the Madawaska area by the British, which really upset the American government. I'm not exactly sure how the order of this went, but the Americans sent militia from Maine to Madawaska, and the British sent their own militia from Lower Canada. So both sides now had a military presence in the area, and things looked like they were going to get bad. This was the start of the Aroostook War, or the War of Pork and Beans. The U.S. Congress voted for 50,000 soldiers and $10 million to be prepared in case of a war with Canada, and both sides were pretty afraid war was going to start. It seems like the beginning of an international crisis. But in the end, nothing happened. The soldiers sat in their positions, eating frozen pork and beans in the cold. An American general named Winfield Scott, who you might know from Victoria III, was sent to Augusta to keep peace, and soon he met with the governor of New Brunswick, Sir John Harvey. The two men made a handshake agreement to set up a joint commission of the disputed territory and to settle things once and for all. This had all gone on for far too long and had almost escalated into something major. The troops were brought back home, fear died down, and the U.S. Secretary of State, Daniel Webster, and English Minister, Lord Ashburton, figured out an agreement. They decided, in 1842, to delineate the border as such, creating the modern borders we have today. The disputes in the area were over and everything was great. Right, well, not for John Baker. He's kind of the main character, and I kind of promised it in the short. So we're going to talk about him for a little bit. After the Webster-Ashburn Treaty was signed, or the Webster Sellout Treaty, Baker was very upset. He lost a lot of his land-grabbing opportunities, and what he did for a long time isn't known. He would die a few decades later, though, in 1868. To quote Roger Paradis, "In obscurity, unhonored, and unmourned by the state he had felt privileged to serve faithfully for almost a score of years, at a great risk to himself and his family." Which, dang. A statue would eventually be put up for him in 1895, though, and his name is still remembered to this day. So that's something. At least he's remembered. But about Madawaska, the St. John River Valley, and after it split. Though the people there were split between two countries now, they still lived mostly like normal. I couldn't find a way to mention it in the video until now, but it's important that a big part of the population was French Acadian, from the forced migrations of the 1750s and 60s. They spoke French, were Catholic, and though there was a border split in their people now, they still mostly stuck together and just crossed the border to see family and friends who lived on the other side. I think they still do this today, though I hope more legally. That's roughly the story of the Madawaska Dispute. Thank you for watching, I hope you have a nice day, that you learned something, and goodbye.